Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. So on today's episode, I am going to be covering my run at the Animate Columbus Misty Mountain Gaming Clash for Cash cEDH 10K, which was an event which I ended up winning the whole thing. We're going to go into it. Basically, they were using the top deck structure policy. So because there was only 29 participants, we ended up doing 3 rounds of Swiss, cut to top 4. And then obviously in the top 4, winner takes all. That being said, also they did pay out through 5 through 16. So even though there was only a top 4 cut, players who ranked in the Swiss 5 through 16 also got paid out. So it was definitely a very lucrative event for those who attended. And yeah, it's the Clash for Cash events have all been very professionally run. You know, the low attendance really wasn't on the organizers. It was a well-run event. They literally paid out the amount that they said they were gonna, which was pretty awesome. And as I mentioned, like, they have a really good judging team, like sort of the judge team you expect to see at every major cEDH event is usually there. So that was pretty sick. I don't have like a traditional tournament report because I figured it would be a little bit better in general, just sort of talk about the deck I played and kind of what that implied with the event. So we're going to talk a little bit about the event itself, sort of quickly go over the rounds of the tournament for sure, but also this will be somewhat of a deck tech as well, because the deck that I played was an oldie but a goodie. I came in with my Kinnan list. Now, for those who have been sort of paying attention to the format, let's do some numbers to sort of support why this might be an odd choice for some people, because let's go to EDH Top 16 and look at the numbers for Kinnan as of late. So over the past year, right, we have, let's see here, we got about 600 people who signed up and only about a 15% conversion rate. But if we even filter this down more, right, to, let's say, the start of this year, right? So January 1st, 2024. Let's get some metrics in there, right? So where does Kinnan go down to? Kinnan's conversion rate drops a significant amount, right? And goes to a 12.69, meaning only about 12% of the people, 13% of the people who sign up to a tournament to play Kinnan end up making that top 16 result, right? So why would I bring this list is the question, right? I mean, first things first, right? We'll take a look at the list in a second, but I think this is like sort of an important part about the conversations in cEDH and how some of them can have context that others are really missing, right? And Kinnan is one of those decks that the data does not support very well, because it's an atypical example, right? So when you look at a deck like Rogsai, like very good 34% conversion rate, Tim Necrom, Sisse, right? Like all of these decks are putting in these top numbers. And yet when you hand someone who is a higher skill player a Kinnan deck, right, they will still compete in these pods, right? And that's a bit of an interesting paradigm that we really haven't seen a ton. And I think that's a show that, you know, even more so than usual, pilot skill is very relevant with Kinnan, right? And let's talk about Kinnan on sort of a base level, right? And I will shout out Mons of cEDH TV did a really interesting video, basically supporting everything I'm going to end up saying here in this video with like some really solid math. It's kind of funny. I decided to play Kinnan at this tournament, and then I was just looking at videos of Kinnan in cEDH, seeing if anyone had just like done anything cool and spicy with it lately. And then I saw that video from Mons, and then it all sort of just ended up being quite a confirmation and serendipitous. Basically, the short version, and once again, I'll leave it in the description down below, but the short version is he was able to prove mathematically that players with an above average win rate when given Kinnan have numbers that compare to Blue Farm and Sisse and Rogsai. You know, it was just sort of a quantifiable comparison that, you know, I was able to basically lock in for this weekend, right? It's been a theory that, you know, myself and a number of other prolific Kinnan pilots have had for a really long time, which is basically like Kinnan is way better in a competent pilot hands, right? And like so much more so than any other deck that has that sort of high ceiling, low floor, right? So let's talk about Kinnan and sort of this like bare bones nature, and then maybe it'll sort of make a little bit more sense, right? So Kinnan has that very easy barrier to entry as a concept, right? And this is where the differentiation comes in. Kinnan is very easy to understand and understand the motivation for. Now, the more advanced play patterns are something that's where the skill ceiling sort of comes in with this deck, right? Like it's super easy to know my opening hand needs to have a bunch of mana, and then I can start flipping activations with Kinnan, right? Like that is not a hard concept. And then it's also not that difficult to know, like, hey, I'm trying to get Basalt Monolith because that's an infinite combo, right? Like that is a very fundamentally easy basis, right? There is a 1-card combo with your commander that makes infinite colorless mana, and like the secret mission of the deck is to find the ways that filter out that infinite mana to either A, get you a Thrasios, or B, just win you the game with Kinnan activations, right? So like that is a very basic concept. If we look at like some of the more complicated, nuanced natures of cEDH decks at the core, right? Look at cEDH, for example, which is like, okay, you have a number of branching tutor patterns that can get you to an end state that you want to create, but that's also not always the end state you want to create, because that end state only works at sorcery suit, right? Like I can go on and on about cEDH play patterns, right? But it's a tree that branches out so many different ways, right? From the fundamental basis, right? And now we look at Kinnan, which is like the core of this deck is like make infinite mana, put creatures on table, win game. Like it's not the most complicated concept, and therefore piloting it at 100% wouldn't seem like it would be a thing that is so difficult to do, right? But Kinnan is a deck that every micro decision is very important, right? And in the same way that like a lot of players really struggle to play stacks decks, right? We're not saying stacks effects are not powerful, right? Like you play a Deafening Silence and it can warp an entire game. Let's look at the Cowtown Finals, right? As just an example of that, right? So that's one of those things that like Kinnan is a deck that does inherently play stacks effects, right? Like you do play things like Void Winnower, right? You Wonder Cake is like, you know, arguably kind of one. You have Manglehorn, but we also have things like Trinisphere in this deck, right? Things that lock down our opponent's mana value. But I can't tell you the amount of times I've looked at a Trinisphere in my hand and gone, oh, okay, jamming this Trinisphere here would be a concession to the next player, basically. Well, I'll wait until the moment is right so that I can play it and at the appropriate time, right? And like there are some times legitimately where I have Trophy Mage out and it's like, yeah, I could go grab Assault Monolith right now. I could go grab Mirage Mirror, like any of that stuff. And it's like, no, I'm going to go grab Trophy Mage right now, right? And this is something that we'll actually talk about. So let's talk about the last time I played Kinnan, and then we can get a little more context on this event. I super duper want to shout out the Clash for Cash events. As I mentioned, like they're super professionally run. I have a really great time going to those. I've been able to be a guest at some of them as of recent history, and they're really, really fun and a blast to participate in. I can't stress enough how much fun they are. You can find all the info at clashforcashgaming.com, as they are the organizers that are running all of these tournaments, whether they're in cons or not. So yeah, Clash for Cash, super fun. Subsidiary Misty Mountain Gaming, those you might know from a very, very popular dice company for a lot of nerd sport. At this point, y'all gotta know I'm talking about Tales of Adventure Magic. ToaMagic.com is one of the best places that you can go to find your singles. Now, if you are going to events like Command Fest and stuff like that, or you're going to any of the RCs, Toa Magic will almost always have a booth at these events. So if you go to ToaMagic.com and order your singles there, you can actually do at-event pickup. Not to mention, obviously, you can have them sent to your home as well. But they got a great inventory, great selection of bling, if that's your thing. And yeah, great stuff. Go check out toemagic.com. Yeah, so those who are, some more of our patient observers might remember the last time I played Kinnan, which was when I was able to win the Boil with it, right? And basically after the Boil, everyone was like, oh my God, Kinnan's the boogeyman of the format, right? Which is technically, an understandable notion for sure. So we're going to do a little comparison page here, right? So big changes. Some of them, MDFCs from Modern Horizons 3. Some of them did not come up, but that's okay. Sometimes a smaller tournament means that is the case. I definitely made some changes to this list. I cut Docent for the time being. it was not necessarily the fact that I didn't like Dosin. I liked Dosin quite a lot. It was more so the case that I was like, wow, there's no slots in this deck and I need to find space. Like I had a couple spicy cards that I was trying to play for this tournament, and I just didn't, because I was like, there's no space in this deck. It feels very snug. I had like one spicy slot, which is our stun double here, but we'll talk about that. Yeah, so I took out Spell Snare. Spell Snare's removal I didn't feel great about, but I did add Sink into Stupor, so that was okay. Spell Snare, as I mentioned, well, this is also a delay deck. It's a mana drain deck, right? So it's not exactly like I'm skimping on interaction, where Spell Snare is usually in certain decks like one of my only ways to counter creatures, whereas this deck already has some already baked in. So I didn't feel super bad about cutting it in this deck specifically. I removed some of the bad MDFCs from the old MDFCs that were never really like that helpful, although I will say Seagate is one that I might miss. But obviously they just got like stripped upgrades. Like Bridgeworks Battle is a fight spell as opposed to, a bad version of what our commander does, right? Like, it's simple stuff like that, right? I did finally cave on the crop rotation, E-Zone, Fabricate stuff. A lot of the popular lists were playing this configuration. Fabricate, I'm still like, I'm convinced that I'm probably going to play it for the rest of the time that I play this deck, but it was one that like took me a minute. Like I wasn't sure, I think it's very solid. Obviously being able to grab your Treasure Vault or your Basalt Monolith or your Mirage Mirror or your Trinisphere or your Spellskite, right? Like there's a lot of targets with this card, right? And that's why I think it's gonna stick around, right? It does a lot. I just hate having to play a sorcery in a deck that really breaks parity on a lot of these things very well, right? Like just tapping out for a sorcery when normally our game plan is pretty resilient to interaction does not feel good. You know what I mean? But what it does do is add a speed option in the deck that was not previously available, which is decent, right? Let's talk about crop rotation, right? So I did go down a land, you guys can see. That made me very anxious. One of the things that I have sort of died on the hill of for a really long time was that the Kinnan decks that I've been seeing are super tight on mana, right? Like I went down to 26 lands here, right? So that is the 26 lands is definitely small, right? With two of them being MDFCs, right? And then also notably like 1, 2, 3 of them, 4 of them are potentially colorless, right? So it's not a ton of colored mana sources. It's been okay. It's definitely something where I have been kind of trying to find a spot for a 27th land to go back in. It was like the decision before the tournament. I was humming and hawing on that one quite a lot, like back and forth, 27 land, 26 land. I think for consistency's sake, I'll probably try and find a 27th land slot, but the deck operated very well without it. There was occasionally times where I would be, missing a land drop, but like it didn't feel like, oh my God, the deck is just horrible now and I can't do anything. Like it felt very within reason, So we definitely went down there. And then the crop out E-Zone stuff. I wasn't playing this for a long time because I thought that the crop rotation. So crop rotation is one of my least favorite cards of all time in cEDH. The crop rot E-Zone play pattern, Emergent Zone to be clear, giving everything flash, is really powerful. Don't get me wrong. This is the only reason, in my opinion, that we really want to be playing crop rotation, but crop rotation also is a filter to go get your Treasure Vault. If you have a Basalt Monolith in hand, it's also just a quick way to go get a Gaia's Cradle, although I find that to be one of the more underwhelming ways to play it. You can also do instant speed wins by going and getting Cephalid Coliseum. There's a bunch of really good players who've sort of illustrated how you go through that process, but the TLDR is because Cephalid cracks itself as part of the cost. When you are infinitely looping through your deck, you can actually put infinite copies of Cephalid Coliseum on your opponents if you have an Emergent Zone active. It's a whole thing. Basically, the important part is you make them draw their entire decks, and if they respond, you just put more activations on the stack, right? It's pretty powerful in that way. So that's sort of that thing there, right? So crop rotation, it's very strong. It was one of those things where I played it and then it immediately refunded itself as far as that's understanding. So let's talk about the game where this came up, right? So this is my round 3 against Zeb from Playing with Power, Kirkland, who's the Uranus Street Urchin deck, and then a lovely player named Ty who is playing a Malcolm Vile Smasher deck, right? Zeb is been on Lotho as of late, like just a deck they've been playing a decent amount, and trying to really sort of push its power level. And this is my win-in for the top 4, right? So I've won round 1. I've lost round 2 to Andy Beach, also known as NATO, very good player. And now here is round 3, and I'm once again on that win-in to make top 4, right? So I'm looking at my opening hand, and it's just a lot of mana. It is a lot of mana ready to go, right? It's I believe a gemstones into a land with a Chromox. So I'm able to get Kinnan out and then hold up mana, right? We're at the point here with this hand where I have my Basalt Monolith in hand, right? I have the crop rotation that we're talking about in hand, right? So, and then I also have a Moon Silver Key, right? So I'm kind of looking at this opening hand, and for those who don't know, Moon Silver Key is a card that I often go on entire rants about how I don't play this card optimally, and it works for me every single time, right? So I have the crop rotation in hand, I have the Basalt Monolith in hand, right? So I'm basically going like, I don't need to go grab Mirage Mirror or Treasure Vault with this Moon Silver Key, right? I can actually go and use it for disposable mana, right? So what I'm able to do is convince this table that I'm like, hey, look, I'm going to go get Moon Silver Key. I'm either going to go grab like a Soul Ring or a Mana Crypt with this. That's it. It is just a 3 Mana Crypt, right? Pretty bad. Arguably a Warren Power Stone, right? So that's sort of what I play on turn 1, right? And this play pattern, in addition to what the crop rotation stuff that's going to come up, is definitely what like the factors that got me this win, right? So playing this Moon Silver Key out, and I've actually, there was another tournament round when I was playing Lotus Con back way back when that was the thing, where it was the same thing, right? I was able to play a Moon Silver Key very early on. I went and grabbed a Mana Rock with it, and that was able to set up my engines for the rest of the game, as opposed to, needlessly jamming a Mirage Mirror Basalt Monolith win with no backup and all that stuff, right? Seems pretty bad when that stuff happens. Okay, so back to this game state, right? So I get that Kinnan out with the Moon Silver Key, and I pass the turn, right? Zeb has, I believe, a turn 1 Lotho going on, right? Then we have Kirkland up, and he just plays a fetch land and passes. And he's definitely giving me the look like I'm holding up a Pyroblast for your Kinnan. Like there's this look that which is just like, hey man, don't make me use this interaction here. We're all gonna chill, right? I am super excited to announce that we are now partnering with Heavy Play. Heavy Play is a brand that I have always really, really liked, and I didn't think they were working with creators, and got reached out to by some of the representatives, and I am ecstatic. They make some of the coolest deck boxes ever. I have to say, it's so cool. They have little commander windows for you to be able to see your commander decks as you're having that experience. They fit fully double-sleeved commander decks. They have cool magnetic dice trays. Their playmats are also magnetic, so they literally clip onto one another. In the grand scheme of things, they're a newer company, and they have come onto the scene with a bold look for their product. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, we have been working with them, and they have some product to give away as well. Right now, we are going to keep the first giveaway to patrons only, just to say a thank you for supporting this channel. But Heavy Play has been awesome. I really stand behind their product, especially their deck boxes and their playmats and their dice trays. All of their product works together, and it's such a cool, unique design that you really haven't seen before Heavy Play. Once again, a lot of these magnetic locks, these things are so strong. Like, I actually had some of the deck boxes and the dice trays clicking together while they were still pre-packaged in the boxes. Really crazy stuff. Super happy to be working with Heavy Play, and I'm very excited about this partnership. I think there's going to be a lot of stuff coming in the future working with Heavy Play, and I have nothing but good stuff to say about them. The Malcolm Vile Smasher player plays Malcolm, passes the turn. Makes sense, turn 1 Malcolm. Then we go to Zeb, who gets a little more mana down and just passes the turn, right? Gets a Lotho trigger off, has a little mana floating, right? Coming back to my turn, right? I have this Moon Silver Key here, right? I do what I say, right? I go crack, get a Mana Crypt with it. Now, I could easily just slam and jam, right? But I'm like, no. I'm going to just chill at this point, right? So what I end up doing is using the mana that I got on my turn. Actually, I don't remember if I did get a Mana Crypt or a Soul Ring. But anyways, I use this mana to play the Wandering Archaic that I have I don't remember if this was my opener or if I drew it. There was a Wandering Archaic somehow, but I played the Wandering Archaic, right? And I just passed the turn, right? Now all I have in my hand is Crop Rotation Basalt Monolith, right? The thing that I'm trying to avoid is the very obvious interaction that Kirkland has, right? Now, I only have a Gemstone Caverns up at this point, right? And in my hand is just 2 cards, Crop Rotation, Basalt Monolith, right? I could have jammed on my turn. I guarantee I would have eaten a Pyroblast and the game would have been over. And this is the stuff where Crop Rotation thrives, right? So had there been no interaction from my opponents, I could have easily just jammed the Crop Rotation, gone and got my my treasure vault, right? Used the mana that I definitely had in abundance, right? And then just played Basalt, made infinite treasures, win the game, right? But I don't think that's going to work because once again, I don't have any other interaction in this hand, right? So I pass the turn at this point. We go to Kirkland's turn. He uses a Spirit Guide, plays his commander, the Gloomstalker. We pass. Then we go to Malcolm Vilesmasher's turn, right? And Malcolm Vilesmasher plays a series of plays that were like strictly optimal from his perspective that happened to go very, very well for me, basically. So he fires off a Jessica's Will. He makes 7 mana because I think he targets Kirkland. And then I'm like, okay, Wandering Archaic, right? Like I get 7 red mana. And he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. Because, you know, to be fair, yeah, sure, whatever. I have 2 cards in hand and a Gemstone Caverns up, right? And then he fires off a Wheel of Fortune. So that triggers Lotho. And Zeb shows me an Aven Interrupter, right? So what I'm thinking here is, oh, shoot, right? So we're in this situation because he goes, you know, if you can cast a second spell, I can get the Interrupter here to be able to hit this Wheel of Fortune, right? And I do think what Zeb did by showing me this interaction piece was correct, right? Like I think him showing like, hey, I have this piece. Is this wheel what we're trying to hit right now? Or should I be like, you know, holding up mana for post wheel stuff, right? The thing was, I was looking at Crop Rotation Basalt Monolith in my hand and going, I really don't want to lose this Crop Rotation and Basalt Monolith to this wheel, right? So once again, Zeb has 1 treasure up, Aven Interrupter costs 3, right? So I'm like, okay, I need to be able to respond to everything that's happening here, right? So, and meanwhile, there's also still a Wandering Archaic trigger on the Wheel of Fortune, right? So I'm still thinking about that, right? This is in response to all of this stuff. So I go and I Crop Rotation, and use that Gemstone Cavern. So Gemstone Cavern is gone. I have no more colored mana that is good for my colors, right? I Crop Rotation and I go and hit the Emergence Zone, and I hit that, crack it, flash out the Basalt Monolith. Now, this is exactly enough to give Zeb 1 more treasure, right? Does not get him the 3 treasures because the other treasure trigger is still on the stack in response to all of this stuff, right? Very messy stack at the current moment. So you know, the initial spell is like, we have the wheel here, right? Which has a Lotho trigger on top of it, which has a Wandering Archaic trigger on top of it, the Emergence Zone crack on top of all that, and then me flashing in the Basalt Monolith. Now, the Basalt Monolith sticks at this point, right? The only blue player in the pod is very much tapped low because they are trying to pop off with the Wheel of Fortune, right? Which may or may not be copied at this point. So because the Emergence Zone crack resolved and I have a Basalt Monolith, I also at this point propose infinite colorless mana, right? Once again, no more cards in hand, right? So at this point, the wheel's kind of like, gotta happen, you know? And I basically say, yeah, you know what, the wheel, I will be making a copy of it because at this point, I actually don't want Zeb to be able to just Aven Interrupter and hit the wheel. I want there to be 2 wheels so that there is no valid target, right? So that basically I have an Emergence Zone crack, infinite colorless mana, and it goes into my rotation. I do get kind of lucky at this point because at this point, my Lotho trigger resolves and my Wandering Archaic copy of the wheel resolves. Zeb does not have his second treasure yet, right? So this is all in response to that, right? Yeah, because my Wandering Archaic trigger took precedent because of turn order, right? At this point, I get wheeled into a hand that has, you know, some dead cards for sure, but specifically it has Simic Signet, Mox Opal, Trophy Mage, big up there, and Flesh Duplicate. Now, I think a lot of people would have just gone, okay, sick, Mana Rock, Trophy Mage. go get Mirage Mirror, right? But this is something I'm talking about all the time, like thinking about where the points of failure were with this line. One of the things I end up doing is I go, okay, cool. I play my 2 mana rocks, still in response to this other wheel that's on the stack and in response to this Lotho trigger. So I go, okay, in response to all of this stuff, let me go Mox Opal. Cool, great. Let me go Simic Signet. Everyone's like, yep, cool. And then I go, okay, flash in this Trophy Mage. Now, the thing I could do to protect myself at this moment, right, is to go grab Trinisphere. So this is one of those pivot points I was kind of talking about earlier in this episode. I go grab the Trinisphere because the Trinisphere guarantees that, you know, even though everybody drew this grip of fresh 7s, no one else is going to be able to use this free interaction to be able to stop my Basalt Monolith because I don't have any counter spells in it. Or sorry, my Trophy Mage into Mirage Mirror because I don't have any counter spells. I just have the mana production that I was just talking about. And I'm like, I'm trying to lock up this game right now, right? Also, you know, Malcolm Vile Smasher is trying to do a bunch of crazy stuff, and you know, at this point, they're trying to go off, right? So like getting a Trinisphere is never a bad thing against a Malcolm Vile Smasher Grixis list, right? So that was fine. So I do that, I grab Trinisphere, and then I use the other 2 blue I have because I had to use Simic Signet as one of my mana protection sources, right? For those who don't know, when you have Simic Signet with Kinnan, it makes green, blue, blue, or green, blue, but I chose obviously green, blue, blue. So then I use the Flesh Duplicate since the Trinisphere is resolved. And I make a copy of Trophy Mage. And that copy, that's when I go and grab Mirage Mirror. And I'm able to kill my opponents at instant speed. Now, my Malcolm Vile Smasher opponent has a Final Fortune that they try and fire off, but I'm like, sure. But that does not affect anything else that is happening at this point. So basically, I'm able to do the crop rotation loop that we talked about earlier in this episode, where I'm able to infinite Cephalid Coliseum everybody to death. And yeah, so that was one of those games where I go, oh my goodness, you know, despite me not liking crop rotation, this is actually, remember, this is where all this started. Is me saying, I'm not a big fan of crop rotation, but in this deck, it's kind of busted, right? That's one of those times. This crop rotation was just an MVP. It was very, very powerful and absolutely did a ridiculous amount of work there, right? So really crazy stuff there from crop rotation. It was able to basically allow me at any point to go, cool, here's my win condition, here's my treasure vault, like let me go jam that. But, and then when I needed it to not be, it was like, here's my emergent zone. You know, despite the awkwardness of this card, despite sometimes you're going to eat a mental misstep and get strip mined, the times where it works really, really well. And that was a turn 2 instant speed win that this card enabled, and also would have been a turn 2 sorcery speed win had I not read that my opponents had interaction, right? So very, very powerful stuff here from crop rotation. Very happy to add it to the deck. This was probably one of the longest side tangents, but I was going to talk about that round anyway, so it's fine. And then Archer's Charm has come out since the last time I played this deck. It's very good. It's a fight spell or a removal spell, or it's a tutor. Yeah, it's that easy. ESG, very powerful. You know, I was a bit of a doubter about how well it fit in this deck, but it just makes a bunch of curves way less awkward. And I have been someone who's been pushing this card in a number of other decks that I've been playing, so it kind of just made sense that when push came to shove with this deck, I was like, no, it fits in pretty well. The spicy card of the day was Stunt Double. Unfortunately, it never came up because it was sort of a smaller time-wise tournament, and I'll sort of hold talking about the play patterns of it until I can get more experience with it. I know people mentioned that Jink Attacks is one of my first cuts. If you watch my Boyle breakdown, it was one of those things where I said, like, I'm probably cutting this card because as much as it was my like favorite for a really long time, it sort of forced me to be the bad guy in a bunch of pods where I didn't want to be for a while. So that's obviously like a big no-no in a pod, in especially in a game where you are trying to you know, dissuade advantage a lot of the time and really not like appear to be the threat. When you are sort of forced to be the threat in a situation where it's not optimal, that usually leads to you losing the game in times when you cannot really afford to do so. We'd like to thank one of our sponsors on today's episodes, Trades Media LLC. Now, if you haven't seen any of the work by Trades, they make a fantastic token series, as well as playmats and other accessories for your Magic games. They are most notably known for their mana tracking system, because in a lot of tournaments, you actually can't use dice to represent floating mana. So what Trades has is they've actually created these mana packs where they basically have several of each basic mana type, and in these packs, you can have a bunch of different mana. It's super helpful in a tournament setting when you are trying to track your mana, and even if you're just playing pickup games at home, it helps with all that pesky mana floating. I have been sponsored in the past by Trades, but have used their tokens long since I have been sponsored as a player because it's just good, and I just use them because they work really, really effectively. So super happy to have this episode sponsored by Trades, and cannot talk about the product enough. On top of their mana floating tokens, they have a number of different other products, including some really sweet custom tokens and a token set that literally goes over a number of different common tokens in the game, and they're always updating to do new cool designs. They also have a playmat that I used to rock for a considerable amount of time, and as you can see, literally pages and pages of stuff up on their Etsy as well as a Bonfire store. You can find the link in the description down below, and I'm pretty sure code comedian still gets you a good percentage off your order. Let's talk about the rest of my rounds. Round one was a pretty simple game. I was facing off against these lovely gentlemen right here. TLDR in that game was the Rogsai was in 4th seat in the pod and kept just trying to have everything. They had a One Ring and a Necropotence in their opening hands, and eventually they kept putting pressure on the table until there was a point where everybody was tapped pretty low, and I had Fabricate in hand, right? Another time where we talked about, it gives you those early game options, right? And so Rogsai exhausts everyone out of resources. At this point, I have a Treasure Vault as my land, right? So if I go get a Basalt Monolith at any point, I can go and do the Infinite Treasure thing, right? The issue is that I'm sort of missing land drops. So I'm holding up interaction for this pod a decent amount, because once again, Rogsai is presenting as a very significant threat throughout this game. And then at the end step before my turn, I go, look, if I miss on a land drop here, I'm kind of in trouble. So I actually end up using the channel ability of Colossal Sky Turtle, which if you still haven't played this card in any of your cEDH decks, do so. This card is so flexible and so powerful. It's a removal spell when you need to be. It removes Grand Abolishers. It picks up important pieces with an uncounterable nature at instant speed, right? Regrowth effects are not traditionally instant speed, and like the ability to hold up mana and then use a regrowth is like just so underestimated. This card is insane. So we're in this pod, and I actually end up using Sky Turtle's channel at the end step to go, cool, let me yoink up this fetch land that I have in my graveyard, right? Play the fetch land, crack it. So now I have enough mana to tutor the Basalt Monolith, play the Basalt Monolith, and still have Treasure Vault open to be able to make all my treasures. And what I do at this point is I look at the table and I go, hey, y'all, I feel like this is my opportunity to jam. If anyone can show me any reason not to, show me, and that way I can hold up more interaction for the Rogsai, who still has a One Ring active, about to untap on 3, right? So that's part of this too, right? Like, I'm under pressure from the Rogsai. They have an engine that will allow them to keep drawing even if things go wrong, right? So I'm like, somebody give me something here to let me know I shouldn't go for this. And everyone just kind of like shrugged and looked at me, and I was like, okay. Right. And so I Fabricate, go get the Basalt Monolith, play it in the field. They don't have anything. So that was my turn 1 win there. Right. Pretty clean, pretty simple. Rogsai, as I said, Necropotence and One Ring, they were the problem for a really long time. And the only reason I had a window was because they pushed really hard. Right. And it just happened to work out that I was able to get my window and capitalize upon it after they had pushed pretty hard. Round 2, I played against Andy Beach, Ian Loesch, Mitchell Sellers. These two, especially in the top, were also in my top 16 at Cowtown, so very good players. We have Blue Farm, Nadu, I believe Mitchell was on Blue Farm as well, and then myself, right? So super grindy pod. Basically, we get hit with a turn 1 Drannith Magistrate from Andy. And we were also teasing Andy because he had actually gotten the bye during this very small tournament the round beforehand. So he went from like the bye to seat 1, pod 1, right? So we're definitely messing with him with that. But then he immediately drops a Drandith on us. And then obviously the Nadu player and myself are like, oh, woof, right? The majority of the description of this game I can factor down to, we got to the point where Ian never cast Nadu. I never cast Kinnan. I at one point was like, okay, like I've accumulated enough mana to maybe hard cast this Consecrated Sphinx to get me back into it. It immediately ate a Swords to Plowshares, and then the 2 blue farm players were sitting there back and forth with 2 Ristics apiece, or not 2 Ristics apiece, a Ristic apiece, and sort of just like drew. And it was looking like we maybe could draw it out into a draw, but Andy was able to get there and take the W. So that was round 2. And then I'd already explained what happened round 3 of the tournament. And then the finals. The finals was pretty classic. Like, I don't really know how to describe it other than that. There was the configuration went blue farm, myself, then the Rogzai player who I played against earlier, and then blue farm, right? So blue farm, Kinnan, Rogzai, blue farm. Andy was on the play in the finals, led with a Mystic Remora. I played a couple dorks, passed it up. Our player in 4th, also on blue farm, eventually gets a Ristic Study out because they Enlightened Tutor for it on turn 1. And Andy follows up the Mystic Remora with an Esper Sentinel. So it's really just a case of like, how many cards is Rogzai going to draw these 2 before it's their time to go? Rogzai gets another Necro down, which seemed to be like just strapped to his hand. He had a Necro like every game I played against him. And that was the game, right? Like, it was a lot of just passing through these turns, me not being able to really push at the right time. At one point, I used the Trophy Mage to go grab the Trinisphere, the play pattern that we're lovingly talking about a decent amount in this game. But that gets counterspelled by Andy, and it's a whole thing back and forth. Andy tries a really good win attempt on his upkeep to be able to go grab a Grand Abolisher with a Vamp Tutor, fights over it a bunch, and eventually it gets back to me. And we're at the point where I'm able to jam the Basalt Monolith. Everyone sort of fought really hard on Andy's turn because he's the player right before me and had a ridiculous amount of interaction, and we're all sort of firing off every spell we have as a group, right, to try and stop him. And it gets to the point where we're sort of out of resources, but we are able to like scrap a bunch of stuff together, right? So then it comes back to me, and he still has a Ranger Captain that he's played afterwards, right? So it's not like he could have cracked the Ranger Captain and gone for it on his turn. The Ranger Captain happened after he was able to like invest into a bunch of stuff after that stuff, right? So I put Basalt Monolith on the stack. He cracks the Ranger Captain. He also has a bounce for Kinnan, which ended up not really mattering. I go to put the Basalt Monolith activation on the stack. He goes to bounce it in response. I put another one on there, which is relevant. That actually does affect sort of the way the rest of the game goes, right? So he does bounce the Basalt Monolith in response. I pay for another activation to do it again. I have my Thrasios already in hand, right? So I play the Thrasios and draw the majority of my deck at this point, right? Because Ranger Captain, yes, was cracked, but Thrasios obviously gets through that. So I'm able to sculpt a 7. The other players concede at this point, and I'm sort of forced into a situation where I have to dig down till I get my Elvish Spirit Guide, play my Seedborn Muse, get the majority of my lands into play, and sculpt a hand that is Emergence Zone, a bunch of interaction, and Endurance, and Basalt Monolith because it got bounced, right? But luckily, I am able to untap on the next player's upkeep. I'm able to fight through any interaction they might have. I've also got... I've used the Infinite Colorless at this point to play my Seaborn Muse, I play my Spell's Guide, I play my Void Winnower, I play my Wandering Archaic, which is very relevant for fighting off a bunch of the spells that end up being thrown to me because, once again, Andy went for a win, I went for a win, so the other blue farm player has like 15 to 20 cards in hand at this point, right? But we get to the point where I'm able to resolve the Emergence Zone activation, I'm able to resolve the Endurance, shuffling everything back into my library, and able to loop through my deck doing the Cephalid Coliseum loop that we had talked about in the previous game. So... at the end of the day, was able to take down the victory. For some reason, the top deck page never had the finals match reported, I guess. But that's okay. Yeah, Kinnan was able to get me there. And, you know, a lot of the stuff that you're hearing from this tournament report is about the flexibility of this deck, right? The ability to have those times where, yeah, like it's super easy to just jam the Basalt Monolith into a bunch of interaction. But I, you know, checked with the table, like, should I not do this right now, right? I had a lot of situations where instead of going for win conditions, I'm going and grabbing Trinisphere, right? To be able to, you know, try and slow down Rog size and blue farms and stuff like that, right? Like I'm having a lot of these situations where I am looking towards the grind part of the game. Something that might be kind of important to note is I never once activated Kinnan's ability unless I was winning the game. So like this was not one of those tournaments where I sat on Kinnan's activation and then just did a blind flip, right? I was using the cards in my hand to be able to actually push that advantage, right? Because sometimes the blind flips on Kinnan are bad. Sometimes they're amazing, right? The big flips archetype is really solid. And when you need it, it's super insane, right? The problem is that sometimes people rely too heavily upon it, right? So that is something to maybe keep in mind as well. Now, there are games where I'm just getting a bunch of mana and activating Kinnan, and that is, in my opinion, a perfectly acceptable game plan. Because worst case scenario, you get Graph Diggers out or whatnot, you can just sort of hard cast some of this stuff, right? The point is, though, I still think Kinnan is very strong, very viable. I think it has a lot to provide to this format. I still think this deck is one of the best decks in the format. It's just got a really high ceiling and a bit of a lower floor. So it's just something important to recognize about this deck and something to keep in mind. That's about it with this one. I know it's obviously a bit of an atypical video because it's half sort of tournament report, half sort of deck tech about the changes and updates of this list. As I said, I still think Kinnan's a top contender in the format. I think it's just a list that is hard to play at 100%. And for those who are still interested in the archetype, it's possible to do very well with this deck. It's broken on a fundamental level, right? Like it's an outlet and a mana doubler in the command zone that only costs 2 mana, right? So like there's this is a fundamentally broken card. It is just about finding the ways to make the play patterns that recognize just how busted this card is. Thank you all for watching this Deck Tech Tournament Report. I hope you all enjoyed this. I had a great time. Once again, check out those Clash for Cash events. I will be at one what is now my next weekend, but by the time you all are watching this, it will have been last weekend, Clash for Cash Raleigh, which will be a 15K. So yeah, these guys are not messing around with their prizing. These events are coming soon. I think there's a San Jose event later next month as well. So if y'all want some just well-prized big cEDH events, check out the Clash for Cash gaming website. I'll leave a link for that in the description down below. But yeah, super professionally run, super great tournaments. I can't say enough good stuff about them, and they've been a blast to attend. So thank you all for watching this video. And oh yeah, remember to hit that like button, that subscribe button, all that stuff. It is free and it helps out the channel a ton. And patreon.com/comedianmtg. I'm in the middle of the busiest week of maybe my entire career. I should say busiest month. I've gone to 5 events in a row, I'm pretty sure, and some of them have had like 2 days in between. So I know I was deep last month working on a lot of the Patreon stuff for those who are supporting the channel. Thank you to all those who have done. We've added the new tier where you get videos early and stuff like that. So I hope y'all have been enjoying that. Thank you to everyone who supports the channel so far. And if you have a little bit of extra to be able to support the channel, every little bit goes really a long way, and I thank everyone who's doing that. And it's still something I'm working towards, especially during August. I'm gonna try and just continue to throw more love to the Patreon and revamp a couple things that I've had sort of in the works for a long time. So thank you all for watching this video. Also, if you're interested in cEDH coaching, I have all that information in the description below, but you can find me at comedianmtg@gmail.com, Twitter, Instagram, feel free to DM me either of those places or find me on Discord at comedian_MTG. Thank you to our sponsors for this episode, and thank you everyone for coming and watching.
I know I've been quiet for a minute, I've been grinding still in it, I've been counting these digits, excuse me. I know I've been quiet for a minute, but I'm back on my business. If you see me, don't trip, just excuse me. Wrong if I do, wrong if I don't. That's why I do me no matter what, so excuse me. Lie if I do, lie if I don't. The proof is in the story, take a seat, excuse me.